I was standing at the altar, my veil still warm from the summer air, when I heard the words that didn't belong in a wedding. "Ma'am, please step away from the groom." At first, I thought it was a joke. Some kind of mistake. My guests laughed nervously. My father froze. And my stepmother, Victoria, covered her mouth in a performance of shock that deserved an award. Then the handcuffs clicked shut around my wrists. In front of my family. In front of my friends. In front of the man I was about to marry. As the police read out the accusations, fraud, theft, financial manipulation, I felt the ground disappear beneath me. I kept asking the same question over and over. Who would do this? I didn't have to look far. Victoria met my eyes across the aisle, her voice trembling as she said,
"I'm sorry, Emily."
I just couldn't stay silent anymore. That was the moment I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a plan. Victoria came into my life the year after my mother died. I was 19, still sleeping with the light on, still expecting to hear my mom's footsteps in the hallway at night. My father didn't last long alone. He said the house felt too quiet. He said he needed help. And then, suddenly, there was Victoria, polished smile, soft voice, perfectly pressed blouses, standing in our kitchen like she had always belonged there. At first, everyone called her kind. "She's really stepping up," my aunts whispered. "She treats Emily like her own," family friends said. I wanted to believe that. I really did. Victoria never raised her voice at me. She never said anything cruel outright. Instead, she mastered something far more dangerous: subtlety. She corrected me gently in public. She offered helpful advice that somehow always made me feel small. When I succeeded, she smiled too tightly. When I failed, she was almost relieved. My father didn't notice. Or maybe he chose not to. By the time I got engaged to Ryan, Victoria had woven herself into every corner of our lives. She managed the family finances to help your father. She knew which accounts existed and which ones didn't. She remembered numbers the way other people remembered birthdays. And she reminded me, often, that everything I had came from the family. "You're very lucky, Emily," she once said, sipping wine across from me. Not everyone gets this kind of support. There was something sharp underneath her words, like a blade hidden in silk. When Ryan proposed, I was glowing. I called my father first. Victoria took the phone from him halfway through the conversation. "Oh, sweetheart," she said warmly, "a wedding is such a big responsibility. So much money involved. So many chances for mistakes." I laughed it off. I shouldn't have. In the months leading up to the wedding, Victoria asked questions that felt innocent on the surface, but lingered in my mind long after. Who was paying for what? Where the deposits were coming from? Which accounts my name was on? Sometimes she'd pause, studying me, like she was memorizing something. And then she'd smile and say, "I just worry about you." I'd hate for anything to go wrong. Looking back, I realize now, nothing was going wrong. She just needed it to. The closer the wedding got, the more Victoria inserted herself into every decision. At first, it was small things. She insisted on reviewing vendor contracts, just to make sure no one was taking advantage of us. She asked to be copied on emails with the planner. She offered to handle payments, so I wouldn't be overwhelmed. My father backed her up every time. "She's just trying to help Emily," he said. "You know how organized she is." So, I let it happen. Victoria started dropping comments that didn't sound like compliments anymore. "You're very trusting," she said once, watching me sign a document without reading every line. Sometimes too trusting. Another time, she laughed softly and added, "If something went missing or numbers didn't add up, people might jump to conclusions. Weddings bring out the worst in everyone." I remember feeling a chill, even though the room was warm. Ryan noticed it before I did. One night, after Victoria had spent 20 minutes questioning him about how much his parents were contributing, he pulled me aside. "She doesn't talk to you like a mother," he said quietly. "She talks to you like a suspect." I defended her. Of course I did. "She's just anxious," I told him. "She wants everything to be perfect." But the questions kept coming. She asked where I kept my personal documents. She asked about my access to family accounts. She asked whether I'd ever moved money, temporarily between accounts for wedding expenses. Each time, she framed it as concern. Each time, she watched my face a little too closely. 2 weeks before the wedding, my father called me late at night. His voice sounded strained. "Victoria says there's been some confusion with the accounts," he said. "What kind of confusion?" I asked. She didn't explain. "Just be careful, Emily. This wedding is expensive. People might misunderstand things." Misunderstand what? When I asked Victoria directly the next day, she smiled and touched my arm. "Oh, nothing serious," she said. "I just believe in transparency, especially before a woman becomes a wife." That word, transparency, echoed in my head long after she walked away. By then, I could feel it. The air around me was heavy, like the seconds before a storm breaks. I started double-checking receipts, saving emails, screenshotting payments, without really knowing why. I didn't realize I was already too late. Because while I was planning flowers and seating charts, Victoria was doing something else entirely. She wasn't preparing for my wedding. She was preparing for my downfall. The morning of my wedding felt strangely calm. I woke up before my alarm, sunlight spilling across the hotel room, my phone buzzing with messages from friends and relatives already on their way to the venue. For a brief moment, everything was exactly how it was supposed to be.
No tensión.
No questions. Just excitement. Victoria knocked on my door while I was still in my robe. "I thought I'd check on you," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Her eyes swept over the room. My dress hanging by the window, my shoes lined up neatly, my bouquet resting in water. "You look radiant," she added, after a pause that was just a little too long. At the venue, guests filled the rows quickly. Soft music played. Flowers framed the aisle. When I stepped into my dress, the world narrowed to zippers and buttons and hands adjusting fabric around my waist. I remember thinking, this is it. Nothing can touch me today. I was wrong. The ceremony had just begun when I noticed movement near the entrance. At first, I thought someone was late. Then I saw the uniforms. 2 police officers walked down the aisle, their footsteps echoing louder than the music. Murmurs rippled through the guests. Ryan turned toward me, confusion flashing across his face. One of the officers stopped a few feet away from us. "Emily Carter?" he asked. "Yes," I said, my voice thin but steady. "We need you to step away from the ceremony." Laughter broke out somewhere behind me. Nervous, uncertain laughter. Someone whispered, "Is this part of the wedding?" Then the officer continued, "You're being detained in connection with allegations of financial fraud and theft involving family assets." The words didn't make sense. They floated past me like they belonged to someone else. I looked at my father. He looked stunned, pale, completely silent. And then I looked at Victoria. She was already standing. "Oh my God," she said, pressing a hand to her chest. "I told them I didn't want this to happen today." My head snapped toward her. "You what?" I whispered. Tears filled her eyes instantly, perfectly timed. "I tried to handle this privately," she said, her voice trembling as the guests leaned forward to listen. "But when money goes missing, when documents don't add up, I couldn't ignore it anymore." Ryan stepped between us. "This is insane," he said sharply. "There has to be a mistake." The officer gently, but firmly reached for my arm. As the cold metal closed around my wrists, the room erupted. Gasps, whispers, chairs scraping against the floor. Someone said my name like a question. Someone else said it like a verdict. I didn't cry. I just stood there in my wedding dress, handcuffed, while Victoria sobbed softly behind me and said the words that would replay in my head for months to come.
"I'm sorry, Emily."
I did this to protect the family. That was the moment my wedding ended, and my nightmare began. They didn't let me change out of my wedding dress. That was the first thing that broke me. I was guided down the aisle, past the flowers I'd chosen, past faces that had smiled at me minutes earlier. Now those same faces stared, as if they were watching a crime scene unfold. I could hear whispers, sharp, confused, curious. "Did you know? I always thought she was sweet. Money changes people." Ryan kept asking questions, his voice rising with every step they pulled me farther away from him. "Where are you taking her? Can I come with her?" "This is a mistake." No one answered him. Victoria didn't look at me as they led me past the front row. She was crying now, shoulders shaking, surrounded by guests who were patting her back, murmuring words like brave and strong and how terrible this must be for you. For her. The back seat of the patrol car smelled like disinfectant and old fabric. The door closed with a final, heavy sound that made my chest tighten. When the car pulled away, I caught one last glimpse of the venue through the window. White chairs, blue sky. My life paused in mid-sentence. At the station, they took my phone, my jewelry, my bouquet. One of the officers hesitated when he reached for my ring. "You'll get it back," he said, almost apologetically. I nodded, even though I didn't believe him. The holding room was colder than I expected. The bench was metal. The lights were too bright. Every sound echoed. I sat there, hands folded awkwardly in my lap, white fabric pooled around me like a cruel joke.
"Fraud. Theft.
Forgery." They said the words calmly, like they were reading off a grocery list. I kept waiting for someone to laugh and say it had all gone too far, that it was a misunderstanding, that Victoria had made a mistake. But no one did. A female officer asked if I wanted water. I said yes, then couldn't bring myself to drink it. My hands were shaking too hard. I stared at my reflection in the steel surface of the table, mascara slightly smudged, hair still pinned perfectly in place. I didn't recognize myself. Time stopped behaving normally. Minutes stretched. Hours folded in on themselves. I replayed every conversation with Victoria in my head, searching for the moment where this had begun. The questions. The comments. The warnings disguised as concern. If something went missing, people might misunderstand. I thought about my father, about how he hadn't said a word when they took me away. I wondered if silence meant doubt, or worse, belief. At some point, I started questioning myself. Did I sign something without reading it properly? Did I move money and forget? Could I have done something wrong without realizing it? That was the most terrifying part, not the handcuffs, not the stares. It was how easily doubt slipped in. Ryan was allowed to see me briefly after he posted bail. When he walked into the room, his face crumpled in a way I'd never seen before. He didn't ask questions. He didn't demand explanations. He just wrapped his arms around me, careful not to wrinkle the dress, and held me while I shook. "I believe you," he said into my hair. "Whatever this is, I believe you." I clung to those words like they were oxygen. 6 hours after I'd walked down the aisle, an officer finally returned. He didn't look angry. He didn't look satisfied. He looked thoughtful. "There are some inconsistencies," he said carefully. "We're going to need to verify a few things." I nodded, afraid to hope. As they escorted me out of the holding room, I caught sight of myself again in a glass door, still in white, still unmistakably a bride. But something inside me had shifted. I walked in that day believing my wedding would change my life. I walked out knowing something else had already done it. And whatever Victoria had started, it wasn't finished yet. They moved me into a small interview room just after midnight. The dress was wrinkled now, the satin dull under fluorescent lights. I sat across from a metal table, my hands finally free, though my wrists still felt bruised where the cuffs had been. Ryan had been sent home to wait. I hated that, hated being alone again, but something in the air had changed. The detective introduced himself as Detective Harris. He didn't rush. He didn't accuse. He just sat down, folded his hands, and looked at me for a long moment. "Emily," he said, "I want you to tell me exactly what you know. Start anywhere." So I did. I talked about the questions, the comments, the way Victoria had inserted herself into the finances. I repeated conversations word for word, my voice shaking at first, then growing steadier as I realized he was actually listening. When I finished, he leaned back slightly. "You didn't try to explain this away," he said. "Most people do." "I don't have anything to explain," I replied. "I didn't do what she's accusing me of." He nodded slowly. "That's what I'm starting to think too." My heart skipped. "Why?" "Because," he said, sliding a folder across the table, "the accusations are very detailed. Too detailed." Inside were copies of bank statements, contracts, handwritten notes. Red circles marked certain lines. "She claimed you moved money through 3 different accounts," Harris continued. "But 2 of those accounts require secondary authorization. Your father's or your stepmother's." I swallowed. "Victoria handles those." "I know," he said. "She reminded us. Repeatedly." He told me that earlier that evening, Victoria had come to the station on her own. Said she wanted to help. Said she was worried I might try to blame her out of desperation. "She brought documents," Harris said. "Some originals. Some copies. And that's where she made her first mistake." I leaned forward. "What mistake?" "She knew exactly which documents to bring," he said. "Even ones we hadn't asked for." A slow, cold realization crept through me. Harris went on. "Then there was the timeline. According to her statement, the money disappeared over several months. But the charges were filed the morning of your wedding. That's unusual." "So what changed?" I asked. "Control," he replied simply. He showed me another page, an internal transfer log. "This account," he said, tapping the paper, "was accessed last night from an IP address registered to your father's home." My breath caught. "I wasn't there." "No," Harris said. "You were at your rehearsal dinner." Silence stretched between us. "And then," he added, "we found something else." He stood, opened the door, and came back with another officer. Behind them walked Victoria. She didn't look composed anymore. Her makeup was smeared, her posture rigid. She avoided my eyes as she sat down across from me, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. "Emily," she said softly, "I didn't want you to find out like this." "Find out what?" I asked, my voice shaking with something that wasn't fear anymore. Harris placed a final document on the table. "A private account," he said. "Opened 5 years ago. Funded slowly, quietly. Money siphoned from family assets."
Victoria inhaled sharply.
"You don't understand." And he continued. "Drafts of a revised will. Multiple versions. All unsigned. All heavily favoring you." Her head snapped up. "That's not what this is about." Harris's voice hardened. "You accused your stepdaughter of theft. But the money trail leads to you."
Victoria stood abruptly.
I was protecting this family, she cried. She was careless. Entitled. She would have ruined everything. I stood too, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. You had me arrested at my wedding, I said, my voice breaking. You let them handcuff me in front of everyone. Tears streamed down her face now, real and ugly. I didn't think it would go that far, she whispered. I just needed time. I needed you out of the way. The room felt too small for the truth. Harris nodded to the other officer. Victoria Carter, he said evenly. You're under arrest for fraud, false reporting, and financial manipulation. As they took her away, she turned back toward me, eyes wild. This isn't over, she said. Your father won't forgive you. The door closed behind her with a sharp click. I sank back into my chair, shaking from head to toe, not from fear this time, but from the weight of what had just happened. Harris looked at me gently. All charges against you are being dropped, he said. Effective immediately. Relief hit me so hard I had to press my palms flat against the table to stay upright. I had been arrested as a criminal. I was leaving as proof of her crime. And for the first time since the music stopped at my wedding, I allowed myself to believe something I hadn't dared to before. The truth hadn't just survived her lies. It had finally turned on her. They released me just before dawn. The sky outside the station was pale gray, like the world hadn't decided yet what kind of day it was going to be. Ryan was waiting by the curb, eyes red from lack of sleep, jacket still wrinkled from the night before. The moment he saw me, he rushed forward and wrapped his arms around me so tightly I could barely breathe. It's over, he whispered. They told me. It's over. But it didn't feel over. The charges were dropped, yes. Detective Harris made that very clear. None of this would move forward. None of it would stick. But what had happened, being arrested, paraded out of my own wedding, whispered about like a criminal, couldn't be undone so easily. By mid-morning, the story had already spread. Family group chats exploded with messages. Calls I didn't answer. Voicemails filled with confusion, apology, and disbelief. The same people who had watched me in handcuffs hours earlier were now trying to rewrite their reactions in real time. My father called just once. His voice sounded hollow, like someone had scooped something vital out of him. She confessed, he said. I didn't know. Emily, I swear I didn't know. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to ask how he could live with someone who controlled everything and still claim ignorance. But all I said was, I know. Victoria didn't get that mercy. Later that afternoon, Detective Harris called again to explain what was happening next. The investigation had widened fast. Once they started looking closely, things unraveled quickly. Unreported transfers, altered documents, attempts to revise estate plans without consent. She thought she was untouchable, he said. People who control the story for too long usually do. Victoria was formally charged by evening. Fraud. False reporting. Financial manipulation. Each charge felt like a brick laid carefully on top of the life she'd built out of control and lies. The part that hurt the most came later, when I finally checked my phone. Photos from the wedding were already circulating. Not of the ceremony, but of me being led away. The dress. The cuffs. My face caught between shock and humiliation. People commented in hushed tones, then deleted them. Others left supportive messages that felt too late. Once an image like that exists, it doesn't disappear just because the truth comes out. Ryan suggested we cancel everything. The reception. The honeymoon. The whole week that was supposed to celebrate us. I agreed, without hesitation. That night, as we sat together in silence, I realized something else had ended too. Not just my wedding day. Not just my relationship with my stepmother. But the version of myself that believed staying quiet kept the peace. Victoria had built her power by controlling narratives, money, and silence. The moment those things were taken away, she had nothing left but the truth she'd tried to bury. And the truth didn't just expose her. It erased her authority completely. She had wanted to ruin me quietly, cleanly, in public. Instead, she destroyed herself, slowly, visibly, and with witnesses. And for the first time since I'd heard the word arrest spoken at my wedding, I slept without fear. Not because I felt safe yet, but because I knew she could never hurt me the same way again. The days after everything came crashing down were strangely quiet. No police. No raised voices.
No dramatic confrontations.
Just long stretches of silence that felt heavier than the chaos had. Ryan and I went back to our apartment instead of the hotel suite we'd booked for our wedding night. The garment bag with my dress leaned untouched against the wall, like it belonged to someone else's life. People kept saying the same thing. At least it's over. At least the truth came out. But the truth didn't erase the damage. It just explained it. When I went outside, I felt eyes on me. Neighbors. Acquaintances. People who had been at the wedding. Some smiled too brightly. Some looked away too fast. Even though my name had been cleared, I could feel the residue of suspicion clinging to me. Being innocent didn't mean being untouched. I started therapy 2 weeks later. Sitting in that small office, I finally said the words out loud. My stepmother tried to destroy my life. Once I said it, I couldn't stop talking. About the manipulation, the gaslighting, the way she'd trained me to doubt myself long before she ever called the police. My therapist listened quietly, then said something that changed the way I saw everything. She didn't just try to control your money, she said. She tried to control your reality. That was exactly it. Ryan was patient in a way I didn't know people could be. He didn't rush me to feel better. He didn't pretend everything was normal. Some nights we talked for hours. Other nights we sat on opposite ends of the couch, holding hands, saying nothing at all. My father sent emails. Long ones. Apologetic ones. He said he hadn't seen the signs. That he trusted Victoria because it was easier than questioning her. He asked if we could talk. I wasn't ready. Not because I hated him, but because I finally understood something I'd spent my whole life avoiding. Forgiveness given too early becomes another form of self-betrayal. So, I focused on smaller things instead. Breathing without panic. Sleeping through the night. Letting myself imagine a future that wasn't defined by handcuffs or accusations. The wedding was postponed. Not canceled, just moved somewhere else into a quieter season of our lives. A place without memories of sirens or whispers. Victoria was gone from my daily world now, but the echo of what she'd done lingered. Still, each day it got a little softer. And for the first time, I wasn't rebuilding to please anyone else. I was rebuilding to protect myself. 3 months later, I walked down an aisle again. This time it wasn't grand.
No marble floors. No dramatic entrances.
Just a small garden tucked away from the city, string lights woven through the trees, and 40 people who had shown up when it mattered. Not when it was convenient. I wore a different dress. Not because the first one was cursed, but because I was no longer the same woman who had worn it. As I stood there facing Ryan, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't thinking about Victoria. I wasn't replaying the arrest. I wasn't bracing for something to go wrong. I was present, fully, finally present, in a moment that felt earned. When we said our vows, my voice didn't shake. I promised honesty, resilience, and the courage to walk away from anyone who tried to control my life through fear. Ryan squeezed my hands like he understood exactly what that meant. Afterward, there was laughter. Real laughter. The kind that comes from safety, not performance. The kind that doesn't need witnesses to feel valid. Victoria was sentenced a month later. I didn't attend the hearing. I didn't need to. Justice didn't require my presence to be real. Her downfall wasn't my victory. It was simply the consequence of her choices. My father and I still speak, carefully, slowly. Some relationships don't shatter in one moment. They erode over years of silence. Rebuilding them takes time, and sometimes it doesn't happen at all. I've learned to accept that, too. What I know now is this. Being quiet doesn't keep the peace. It just makes room for someone louder to rewrite your story. Victoria tried to destroy me with accusations, believing the truth could be buried under paperwork and authority. She was wrong. Lies require constant control to survive. Truth doesn't. In the end, I didn't win because she lost. I won because I stopped letting fear decide who I was allowed to be. And that life, my real life, finally belongs to me.